Okay, hello and welcome to this presentation about the context and social background of an Inspector Calls. The play itself, as you can see here, was written in 1946, and the sort of genre is a whodunit mystery play. But it's so much more than that, otherwise there'd be no point studying it for GCSE. It is also a play that exposes vices, corruption, selfishness in society, and most importantly, highlights the importance of our social responsibility to start or to initiate social change or reform. In order to understand any play, you've got to figure out when it was written and how that affected it. And you might ask yourself why. This isn't a history lesson, after all. And what you've got on the screen is the reason why. Assessment Objective 3 is worth 15% of your marks for English literature. The exam board demands that you know the context in which the play is written. They also demand that you look at where it was set, the location, the cultural context, and any literary context. So when we say literary context, we mean the whodunit play. When we say cultural context, we mean what culture it was in, where it was, the society, and we're going to sort of have a little look at that today. So back to this one again. Inspector Calls is set in 1912, but it wasn't written until 1944-1945. Now hindsight is always 20/20, so you can write a play in the 40s, looking back since before the two world wars, and you have a ton of information that you can use, and Priestley does this in such a way as to undermine his characters. So he sets his play in 1912, but it's shown in a post-1944, post-World War era, and is set to a post-World War audience. Now the audience that saw this play, you could guarantee that someone in their family, someone they knew, would have been lost in both of these wars. And if you bear that in mind and try to put yourself in the position of these people, just imagine how they felt. Just imagine for 1 second that you're in a theatre, the Second World War has just ended, your family, friends, relatives, someone close, you will have lost someone, and you are sat in a theatre watching a play full of people who have not experienced this, full of people full of bravado, full of the idea that what they're doing is completely correct. They have yet to understand, they have yet to view, they have yet to experience the horrors of these two world wars. Now in that first box, you've got a little reference to the sort of final quotation there. Do we want to go back to the Edwardian period, or to create something vital and new, a romantic vision of the future? And some people say this is what Priestley had in mind when he wrote this play. He fought in the First World War. He knew what it was like to be on the front lines. So he obviously felt strong enough to write this play. At the time, in 1912, when the play is set, it was under Edward. So it was one of the Edwardian kings, and you had Britain booming, you had the British Empire, you had a time of prosperity, but you also had a time of great social and class divide. After the World War, a lot of that changed, not only because people started to question the class system. You imagine being on the front lines. Class means nothing to you when you're in a war zone. Your officers were from a higher class than the soldiers who they were ordering. Some of the orders turned out to be absolute rubbish. So all of a sudden, this inherent class system in British society began to be questioned by everyone. The class system was what some people blamed for the First and the Second World War, so obviously there were things that people needed to and wanted to question. Now Tony Benn, the MP, in that second quotation there, believes that Priestley consciously intended to make in Inspector Calls a contribution to public understanding which he hoped might lead to a Labour victory after the war was over. Now before we move on from this, you've got to sort of understand the difference between left-wing and right-wing politics. Now what you've got in front of you is a nice little line, and it pretty much simply divided into left wing and right wing. The left wing would be the old school Labour government, and the right wing would be the Conservatives. So that in nowadays terms, we are a right wing democracy. And as you can see there in the right wing, private economic ownership and hierarchy. Therefore, everyone's out for themselves. You make your money and you keep your money. Simple as. When you start to look left wing, you start to come into ideas of socialism and communism, depending on how far into the left wing you go. So there is the idea that everyone owns something in the country, which is obviously the opposite to the right wing. Now, when you look at that, the Edwardian society in 1912 was very, very much right wing. And if you go right to the right, you find fascism, like Mussolini in Italy, and Nazism, like Hitler in Germany. Obviously, they are extremes, but the right-wing government of Britain in 1912 believed in private economic ownership. You worked for yourself, you earned your own money, you gave it to your family, end of. You didn't give charity, you didn't give social welfare to the poor. They were poor for a reason. When you start to look left wing, and again, if you go far, far left, you have Stalinist and Leninist governments. But Priestley was very much a socialist. He looked left wing. He believed that we were all a community. He describes us as bees in a hive. He believes that we're all in it together. Now, depending on your political views, you will either agree with Priestley or you will agree with the Edwardian society. However, this play is very, very much written from a socialist point of view. As I always say in English, you do not have to agree with the opinions of the author. You don't have to agree with my opinions. You need to analyse them, you need to look at them, and then come to your own conclusions. So hopefully you've got a little bit of an idea of left and right wing at the moment. 1912, right wing government. 1945, a time whenever a new government was going to be elected. Priestley writes the play hoping to push people towards the left wing, towards socialism, because he believes that the right wing government caused both of the world wars. Alright, if you think about other plays and on how this fits into the context of it all, you may have heard of a play called The Crucible. Phenomenal play, American author Arthur Miller. If you are looking for an idea of how big a thing it was to be a socialist in this time, read The Crucible. Have a look. Here's sort of a link to the Wikipedia webpage, and it talks about McCarthyism and how being a socialist or being a communist in these times was looked down upon by the government and the horrific trials these people went through. But that's just a little bit of intertextuality. You might just want to go off and read that. Sorry, there's the web address up there. You can click on it. Okay. Priestley is a left-wing writer. We've established that. The audience he is writing to have just sat through 2 world wars. There'll be devastation, some bombed out theatre you're watching this play, and the country is just gathering itself and realising the enormity of what has happened over the past 20 years. And then on stage you have Arthur Burling, and he comes out with some of these quotations that you've got in front of you. These are massively important, not only because they deal with the character of Burling, who is a representation of that Edwardian society, of that right-wing ideal, but they're massively important because you will not have a book with you when you sit your examination, so you've got to learn these. So if we start from the top left-hand corner, it's a pity Sir George and Lady Croft can't be with us. So this is Arthur Burling in Act 1 talking to Gerald, his future son-in-law. Gerald is from the landed gentry. He's from the old school Edwardian money, where the money's come from royals and it's come from years back, and he's used to this life. Arthur Burling is not quite there. He is some of the nouveau riche, so he has made his own money in this society, and therefore he's looked down upon a little bit. So the Burlings are an up-and-coming family. The Crofts are more of an established family, and the Burlings are trying to get there. The whole point of this tiny little line undermines Arthur Burling. Sir George and Lady Croft have snubbed this dinner. So they're having a massive dinner to celebrate the engagement, and who decides not to turn up but the mother and father of Gerald, the future son-in-law. The families are about to be united in Edwardian society. It's a massive time for celebration, yet the dinner's been snubbed. So immediately we start to see Priestley undermining this, and through the society, through the context, through the Edwardian society, starting to undermine Burling. And he does it in subtle ways like that, but he does it in much more obvious ways as well. Another little quote from Burling, which again focuses on this idea of the right wing, of the self-made man. Perhaps we may look forward to the time when the Crofts and the Burlings are no longer competing but are working together for lower costs and higher prices. This man is concerned with money. He's concerned with status. He's concerned with his business. He doesn't at all mention the people who work for him. Lower costs basically means paying his workers not a lot. And you will see when you read the play his attitude whenever Eva Smith comes to him and asks him for more money. The next one is even more obvious than that. A man has to make his own way, has to look after himself. Now, when you start to look at what Burling says and you compare it to what the inspector says and what Priestley wants, you will start to see an opposite. That last quotation is a right-wing, conservative idea. You make your money, you keep it. End of. Okay? The next two bits have a little sort of addendum to them, because you'll start to discuss dramatic irony, and so much of this play is built upon dramatic irony. It's the fact that the audience knows more than the characters on the stage. So us watching it, we know that after 1912 the Titanic sank. We know that within 2 years Britain was involved in the worst war in its history. And you have this idiot, this stuffed shirt standing up there saying things like, when you marry, you'll be marrying at a very good time. Again, Priestley undermining this character of Burling. You'll hear some people say that war's inevitable, and to that I say fiddlesticks. Well, 2 years later, it happened. Gets even worse after that. I'm talking as a hard-headed, practical man of business, and I say there isn't a chance of war. Alright, Priestley, you're laying it on a little bit thick here. And then the last one, the one that always makes me laugh, the Titanic. She sails next week. Unsinkable. Absolutely unsinkable. Within 2 weeks of when this play was set, the thing was at the bottom of the ocean. On the other side of the page, you've got this lovely little extra connection. I'll talk about it a little bit more as well. If you don't come down sharply on some of these people, they'd soon be asking for the earth. Now, this is Burling talking about his workers. So he knows that his workers want more money because they want a standard of living. They want to be able to eat. He says, you've got to come down on them sharply because soon they'll ask for the earth. In my mind, the earth belongs to us. And it was also reflected in the Bible, in the little passage where Jesus spoke on the mountain about the Beatitudes. And he said quite clearly, as you can see in the blue box, the meek shall inherit the earth. So you have a little mirroring here. And again, it's dramatic irony. Again, it's Priestley undermining Mr. Burling. He's almost putting him as an opposite to Jesus. I mean, that's pretty big in literary terms. So from that, from just those quotations, we can begin to see that the context where this character of Mr. Burling is speaking, Priestley has used it to show that he's an idiot. He's shown it in subtle ways, such as the top left-hand corner, where he's, there's this little bit of Edwardian society. Everyone should be pomp and circumstance. However, it's not turned out that way because Mr. Burling's not good enough, so he's been snubbed. And then you have the sheer slapstick of the dramatic irony here. We as an audience know that the Titanic sinks. We as an audience know for sure that 2 massive world wars will rip this country apart. However, we have this stuffed shirt Edwardian grasping man standing there going, nope, no war. Oh, the Titanic, she'll never sink. You need to talk about these things in your essays and in your exams. And again, I'll say it as many times as I'm allowed to. You do not have to agree with the left wing, the right wing. You don't have to agree with Priestley's views. These are just views. They're up for discussion. The study of English is all about your analysis. It's about your opinions. So you look there and you go, I agree with this, I agree with that. But before you do all of that, you need to look at how Priestley has presented his characters. Once you have done that, let loose. Tell the examiner about your political opinions. Okay? So, higher level stuff. There's a few things you can do once you've got the basic characters in your head and you can play with the context a little bit. So there's a few things you can do to try and hit your top level Bs, your As, your A stars, your 7s, 8s and 9s basically, okay? And one of the things you can do is try and link what you're studying to nowadays. So a contemporary relevance it's called. So how does this play, how is it still relevant today? Now you've got a quotation down there from Margaret Thatcher in 1987. She was a conservative, the first female prime minister, so very progressive in that way. However, she was always criticised for being extremely conservative and being extremely right-wing. From her detractors, some people thought she was great. She says there is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families. So her point of view is that you are an individual. She would very, very much agree with Burling, and she would very, very much disagree with Priestley. Now, any sort of links that you can make with the contemporary government, I'm recording this in 2015, so we're under a conservative government, we will be for the next 4 or 5 years. Any links you can make between what Margaret Thatcher is saying there and current Tory or conservative politics, link them back to the play, link them to Burling's point of view. You can come up with wonderful phrases such as, have we learned nothing, blah 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 blah. Or you could be completely of the opposite point of view and you could be sitting there and going, absolutely, Priestley is completely wrong, we are individuals, we do this, we do that. It's completely up to you. But any links you can make between nowadays and the play which is being studied are gold dust. Carrying on from that, most of you will have come across the 7 deadly sins at some point. We've already mentioned there's a contemporary link, or a less contemporary link, but an intertextual link between what goes on in An Inspector Calls and the Beatitudes. Now, taking that a step further, the 6 characters that you can see on the left hand side of the screen, and there are 7 deadly sins. Now you can pretty much match up all of those characters to one or more of the deadly sins, which just adds to this idea that Priestley is using different texts, different knowledge from Western society to try to undermine these characters. He's saying they're all guilty of these sins. On the right hand side, you've got Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. Are there any relationship that you can make between An Inspector Calls and the character of Scrooge? An old man set in his ways, bitter, unhappy, however with grasping amounts of money, visited by 3 ghosts who eventually change his character. That will become more apparent when we start to discuss a few theories about time in a moment, but there are certainly some similarities between the way the play and the novel A Christmas Carol are written, and that idea of a moral tale and how we can learn. So flipping on, this is a different view. This is an overview of the play as a whole. And when you're watching this video, you can be watching it before you've studied anything and trying to apply, but I do recommend you watch it before and after you have read the play. 2 separate theories about how time works. Now, obviously a play is a construct. It's made by someone for a purpose. When they do it for a specific reason, and it sort of links into the morality of how people think. Now, there's 2 separate theories about how time in this play works. On the left hand side, you've got Ouspensky. He believes that when we die, we re-enter our life again from the start. Everything's exactly the same. And if we just keep on doing the same things that we do, we just keep on in the circle. So if I died tomorrow, again, I would be born and I would carry on and I would make all the same choices, blah 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 blah. However, if we change this idea of a circle into a spiral, so imagine drawing a circle and everything goes on and on and on for infinity. Now if you change the circle a little bit and you go off one of the sides, you turn it into a spiral, and things will change. So if we make improvements in our life, we get better. So if you look at the last couple of sentences there, if, however, we improved in some spiritual way. So think about how the characters in an Inspector Calls change. There's two characters should be in your head at the minute, and that's Sheila and her younger brother Eric. And they do, something happens, and they decide to change. Other characters in the family, something happens, and they decide not to change. So they, according to Ouspensky, would be stuck in the same cycle, making the same mistakes, and they would never advance. A circle just carries on, a spiral advances. So, if we continue to make significant improvements, the way would be open for us to get into a new life in which we did not repeat our mistakes. Now, however you view that depends on your point of view. It could be a religious point of view. It could be a spiritual, moral. You may believe you go to heaven. You may believe that you go on to a different life form. Doesn't matter. The idea is that something changes and you go into a spiral. On the other side, you've got Dunn's theory. He laid out the idea that you could be given the gist of seeing, it says gist there, it should say gift, of seeing forward in time as well as looking back. Now this should be ringing bells with you in terms of A Christmas Carol, because of the gift of the future and the gift of the past, and also the gifts that the inspector gives to the family. He gives them a view of the future. And it's that wonderful quotation about fire and blood and anguish. That's his gift to the Burling family. He gives them a terrifying vision of the future. So Dunn believes once you've got that vision, you can change things. So this family are given the gift of foresight. If you continue making these mistakes, this will happen. Do they choose to accept the gift, or do they choose to neglect it? If they neglect it, they carry on making the same mistakes. If they accept the gift and they change, things will change, and this terrifying vision will not come true. We go back again to dramatic irony. We know how things turn out. We know that they do not accept the gift. We know that World War I and World War II will happen. Okay, that's the end of that. Hopefully you've got something down there about the society at the time. So remember the idea that this is 1912, it's set in 1912. The audience watching it, as I said at the beginning, will have lost somebody or something in the war. And they're watching people without this gift of experience. So everything is laden with this dramatic irony. The people on the stage know less than the people in the audience. The only person who you can say possibly knows more is the inspector. He seems to have some idea that what's going on is wrong. Set in 1912, Edwardian society. Flick back and have a little look at the left wing and right wing again. Conservative government, right wing, Labour government, socialist, left wing. Priestley very much from the left wing, the Burling family, Margaret Thatcher, the Conservatives very much from the right wing. Two opposing points of view, both with their merits and their detriments. Think again about the Crucible, think about Arthur Miller. What was it to be a communist in this time, as you would have been labelled? The idea that Burling is consistently and constantly undermined by the writer, by Priestley, with this gift, this idea that he's completely wrong. Priestley had the gift of hindsight. He knew what was going to happen, and he sets about tearing this Edwardian society apart for what it believed in. Also, those higher level skills, remember, intertextual reference, anything that you can link to A Christmas Carol or any other novel you've read, the Bible, anything like that, is going to push you up into the 7s, 8s and 9s. The idea that this play is still relevant today. We have a conservative government. Have we learned from our mistakes? Are there still wars going on? Are there wars we don't know about? Have we just got more subtle? Have we learned about our responsibility? Have we evolved as a society, or have we not? That's your discussion to have. And finally, these theories, these ideas that Ouspensky and Dunn purported, that there are different things that we can do with our lives. Okay? I wish you all the best of luck. Remember, two things. 1, put yourself in the position of the audience, of the 1945 audience. And 2, learn those quotations because you're going to need them. Good luck, ladies and gents.